After 23 years, the maid couldn't keep the secret any longer, and he froze upon hearing it. Martha Higgins watched her boss through the crack in the office door, seeing him once again lost in dark thoughts before the framed photograph on the mahogany desk. For 23 years she had worked in that house, and for 23 years she had carried a weight on her chest that threatened to suffocate her with each passing day. "Mr. Arthur, dinner is served," she murmured, tapping lightly on the half-open door. He lifted his eyes, red from exhaustion, running a hand through his grey hair that had once been jet black. The expression of pain on his face was the same since that terrible morning in March, when he woke up and found only a note on the pillow. "I'm not hungry, Marty, thank you." The domestic maid felt her heart tighten. Arthur Sterling had been a prosperous man full of life, owner of one of the largest construction companies in Atlanta. Now at 52, he seemed like a ghost wandering the hallways of his own home. "Sir, with all due respect, you need to eat. Mrs. Eleanor wouldn't want to see you like this." At the mention of his first wife's name, Arthur clenched his fists tightly. Eleanor Sterling had disappeared without a trace, taking only a small suitcase with some clothes. No farewell note explained the reasons. Only 4 words written by hand. "Forgive me. Goodbye forever." "She abandoned me, Marty. After 15 years of marriage, she simply decided she didn't love me anymore." Martha Higgins swallowed hard, feeling the tears burn her eyes. Each word from her boss was like a dagger to her heart, because she knew the truth. She had always known. The maid was 45 when she first arrived at that house, a simple woman from the countryside of Georgia who came to the capital in search of work after being widowed early. Eleanor received her with a warm smile and always treated her like part of the family. But in the last months before the disappearance, something had changed drastically. "Mr. Arthur," she murmured, the words trembling in her throat, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her with weariness, accustomed to her attempts to console him over the years. Marty was a kind woman, with her brown hair always tied in a neat bun and her uniform impeccably clean. She had raised 3 children alone and put them through college on the salary she earned there. "If it's to tell me she might still come back, please—" Arthur sighed. "No, sir. It's about why she left." The silence that settled in the office was deafening. Arthur stopped shuffling the papers on his desk and fixed his eyes on Martha Higgins. Something in her tone was different, loaded with a seriousness he had never noticed before. "What do you mean by that?" The maid took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change everything forever. For 23 years she had sworn to herself that she would take that secret to the grave. But watching her boss slowly wither away, refusing to live fully, had become unbearable. "Mrs. Eleanor didn't abandon you, Mr. Arthur. She was forced to leave." Arthur froze completely. The papers slipped from his hands and fell to the floor in absolute silence. For a long moment he just stared at the maid's face, trying to process what he had just heard. What did you just say?" "She didn't leave because she didn't love you anymore. She left to save you." Martha Higgins's words echoed through the silent house like a distant thunderclap. Arthur slowly rose from the leather chair, his legs trembling under his weight. 23 years of absolute certainties had just crumbled in a matter of seconds. "Marty, I don't understand. What are you talking about?" The maid approached the table, pulling a small golden key from the pocket of her apron. With trembling hands, she extended it to her employer. "This key opens the trunk in the attic, Mr. Arthur. Inside you'll find letters that Mrs. Eleanor wrote to you all these years." Arthur stared at the key as if it were an alien object. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. Eleanor writing letters all these years, but how was that possible? "Letters? What letters? She never sent me any letters." "Because she asked me never to deliver them, Mr. Arthur. She made me promise to only reveal the truth if your life was in real danger." "And is it?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Martha Higgins looked at the man she had served faithfully for over 2 decades. Arthur had lost nearly 40 pounds in the last few months, drank whiskey alone every night, and rarely left the house. The doctors had already warned him about his high blood pressure and constant stress. "Yes, Mr. Arthur, it is." The businessman leaned on the table, feeling his legs give way. For 23 years, he had built his life believing he had been rejected by the woman he loved most. He remarried Margaret, a younger woman he met in a moment of extreme vulnerability, but had never been able to truly love her. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because Mrs. Eleanor made me swear, Mr. Arthur. She said that if you knew the truth, you would try to find her and put your own life at risk. She preferred to carry the pain alone rather than let anything happen to you. Arthur took the key with trembling hands, feeling the cold metal against his sweaty palm. Every second felt like an eternity as he tried to grasp the magnitude of that revelation. What kind of danger, Marty? What were you two running from? The maid hesitated, knowing this part of the truth would be even harder to accept. She had promised never to reveal details, but now there was no turning back. Blackmail, Mr. Arthur. Someone was blackmailing Mrs. Helena with information that could destroy your company and put your life at risk. My company, but what information? Forged documents that someone planted in the construction company's files. If they were discovered, you would be accused of fraud and money laundering. Mrs. Eleanor found out about the scheme by chance and tried to protect you. Arthur collapsed into the armchair, the cruel reality finally taking shape in his mind. Eleanor had not left out of lack of love, but out of excessive love. She had sacrificed her own happiness to protect him from something he didn't even know existed. Who was doing this to us? Martha Higgins lowered her eyes, knowing this revelation would be the most painful of all. Mr. Gregory, sir, your brother. Arthur's world completely crumbled. Gregory, his brother 5 years younger, had always been the family's troubled child. Addicted to gambling and constantly in debt, he often turned to his older brother for financial help. But Arthur would never have imagined he could go so far. My brother, Gregory, did this. He owed a lot of money to dangerous people, Mr. Arthur. He used Mrs. Eleanor as a bargaining chip to save his own skin. He said if she didn't disappear, he would hand over the forged documents to the authorities. Arthur felt nausea take over his stomach. His brother's betrayal was a wound that cut deeper than any physical pain. Gregory had not only destroyed his marriage, but had forced the woman he loved into exile. Where is she now? Here in Atlanta, Mr. Arthur. She never left the city. She works as a seamstress in a neighborhood on the outskirts, using the name Mary Ann Miller. The revelation that Eleanor had been so close all those years was like a punch to the gut. Arthur imagined how many times he might have walked past her on the street without recognizing her. How many missed opportunities to find her again. Is she all right? Martha Higgins hesitated, knowing the truth would be painful. She's alive, Mr. Arthur, but she's not well. She's never been well since she left. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. Arthur gripped the key so hard his knuckles turned white. 23 years of unnecessary suffering, of misplaced guilt, and of a life built on lies were crumbling before his eyes. Take me to her, Marty. Mr. Arthur, she made me promise that— I don't care about promises, Arthur exploded, standing up abruptly. My wife was forced into exile because of my own brother's greed, and you want me to stay here pretending nothing happened. Martha Higgins took a step back, seeing a fury in her boss's eyes she had never witnessed before. But it wasn't anger directed at her. It was the outrage of a man who had discovered he had been betrayed by the two men he should have trusted most in his life, his brother and himself, for not investigating his wife's disappearance more thoroughly. She won't want to see you, Mr. Arthur. She's very scared. Scared of what? That you'll blame her for leaving, that you won't believe her side of the story, and especially that Mr. Gregory will find out she's still in the city. Arthur ran his hand over his face, trying to organize his thoughts. The house around him felt strange, as if he were seeing everything for the first time. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every memory had been tainted by the lie he had lived for over 2 decades. Is Gregory still involved with those dangerous people? I don't know, Mr. Arthur. But I know he still comes to your house, making a point of seeming close to you. The irony of the situation was cruel. Gregory had visited Arthur countless times over the years, offering brotherly comfort for Eleanor's betrayal, when in reality he was the one truly responsible for that entire tragedy. How did she manage to survive all these years? Did she take money when she left? Just what she had in her wallet, Mr. Arthur. About $60? She didn't want to take anything that could be traced. Arthur felt his heart break, imagining Eleanor, a woman accustomed to comfort, struggling to survive on the outskirts with $60 in her pocket. She had given up everything for love, while he cursed her every day for having abandoned him. And how did you keep in touch all these years? Martha Higgins blushed slightly as if confessing a crime. I visited her on my days off, Mr. Arthur. I brought food, medicine when she was sick, and sometimes a little money I managed to save. The housekeeper's generosity deeply moved Arthur. Marty had shared her own salary to help a woman who wasn't even a relative, driven only by loyalty and compassion. You sacrificed your own resources to help her? Mrs. Eleanor was always very good to me, Mr. Arthur. When my youngest daughter got sick, she paid for all the medicine without me even asking. It was my duty to repay her somehow. Arthur realized he had misjudged the two most important women in his life. Eleanor, for leaving without explanation, and Marty, for keeping secrets. Now he understood that both had acted out of love and protection. The letters she wrote, what do they say? About how much she loves you, Mr. Arthur. About how hard it is to live far from family. About the plans you made together that she still hopes to fulfill one day, and mostly about her regret for leaving without explaining everything. Arthur climbed the mansion stairs with heavy steps, heading to the attic he hadn't visited in years. The golden key trembled in his hand as he searched for the trunk Martha Higgins had mentioned. The attic was dusty and dark, lit only by a small circular window. Among old furniture covered with sheets, he found a wooden trunk he didn't remember having seen before. The key fit perfectly into the lock. Inside the trunk were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to "My dear Arthur," and organized by date. The oldest envelope was from just 1 week after Eleanor's disappearance. With trembling hands, he opened the first letter. "My love, today marks 7 days since I had to leave. I know you must be hating me right now, believing I abandoned you because I don't love you anymore. How I wish I could explain the truth, but I know if I do, you'll try to find me and put your own life at risk. Gregory showed me documents that could destroy your company and your reputation. He said the people you owe money to are dangerous and wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if I didn't disappear. I'd rather bear this pain alone than see anything happen to you." Arthur had to stop reading for a moment, feeling tears blur his vision. Eleanor's familiar handwriting on the time-yellowed pages was like hearing her voice again after so much silence. He picked up a more recent envelope dated only 6 months ago. "Arthur, my heart, today marks 22 years and 6 months apart from each other. I saw you from afar at the corner bakery and almost ran to hug you. You were thinner, with more gray hair, but your eyes are still the same ones that made me fall in love so many years ago. Do you still think of me? Is there still a place in your heart for this foolish woman who was forced to leave?" With each letter read, Arthur felt his world rebuilding on completely different foundations. Eleanor not only still loved him, but had followed his life from a distance throughout all those years of forced separation. In one of the more recent letters, she mentioned his second marriage to Margaret. "I heard you remarried. I can't deny that my heart bled, but at the same time I felt immense relief. You deserve to be happy, my love. You deserve to have someone by your side who can give you the affection I can no longer offer. If she can make you smile for real, I will be at peace with myself." Arthur realized he had never truly smiled with Margaret. The marriage had been a desperate attempt to fill the void left by Eleanor, but it had been built on fragile foundations. Margaret, 20 years younger, had been more interested in social status and financial stability than in him as a person. He came down from the attic with a stack of letters in his arms, finding Martha Higgins waiting in the living room. The maid was compulsively cleaning the same pieces of furniture that had already been cleaned that morning, a habit she had developed when she was nervous. "Marty, I need to see her today." "Mr. Arthur, maybe it's better to think of a more careful way to—" "No," he interrupted, with a determination he hadn't felt in years. "I wasted 23 years of my life believing a lie. I'm not wasting another day." The maid sighed, recognizing her boss's characteristic stubbornness. It was the same determination that had made him a successful businessman, but which now could put everyone in a delicate situation. "She works at a sewing shop on Elm Street, number 247, in the Decatur neighborhood. But, sir, she goes by the name Mary Ann Miller. No one there knows who she really is." Arthur jotted down the address on a piece of paper, feeling his heart race with anxiety. After more than 2 decades, he would finally reunite with the woman he had never stopped loving, even without knowing it. "How is she physically? Has she changed a lot?" Martha Higgins hesitated, knowing the answer would be painful. "Life has been hard on her, Mr. Arthur. She's thinner, with a lot of white hair, and her hands are marked by hard work, but her eyes are still the same." Arthur imagined Eleanor's delicate hands, which once only tended the garden at home for pleasure, now calloused from daily sewing to survive. The guilt, he felt, was overwhelming. "And she never wanted to come back? She never tried to contact me directly?" "Many times, Mr. Arthur, especially when you were sick with pneumonia 5 years ago. She spent sleepless nights wanting to visit you at the hospital, but the fear that Mr. Gregory would find out always won out." Arthur vaguely remembered the pneumonia that almost killed him. Margaret had spent those days taking care of practical details more than showing real emotional concern. If he had known that Eleanor had suffered alongside him, perhaps the recovery would have been less lonely. "Marty, I want you to come with me to her place. She'll trust me more if you're there." "I can't, Mr. Arthur. I'm afraid someone might see us together and make the connection." "Someone like who?" "Mr. Gregory comes by here often. If he suspects we've discovered the truth, he might try to harm Mrs. Eleanor again." Arthur felt rage boil in his veins at the thought of his brother. Gregory had destroyed his family and continued pretending to be a caring, present brother, offering hypocritical emotional support. "Where is Gregory living now?" "In the apartment you bought for him in the Buckhead neighborhood, Mr. Arthur." The irony was bitter. Arthur had financially supported the man who had destroyed his married life, believing he was helping a brother in need. Every dollar invested in that apartment had been a reward for betrayal. "Does he still have gambling debts?" "I don't know, Mr. Arthur. But he's always well-dressed and driving expensive cars. He doesn't seem like the desperate man from 23 years ago anymore." Arthur concluded that Gregory had managed to rebuild his financial life at the expense of his brother's family's destruction. The discovery of this prosperity built on someone else's tragedy intensified his outrage even more. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs at that moment, descending elegantly in a designer blue dress and high heels. At 32, she still maintained the beauty that had attracted Arthur during his most vulnerable phase, but her expression often showed boredom with domestic life. "Arthur, are you okay?" I heard raised voices. He looked at his second wife with completely different eyes. Margaret had entered his life when he was emotionally shattered, offering young and vibrant company that promised to make him forget the past. But now he realized she had never really filled the void left by Eleanor. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just talking to Marty about some household matters." Margaret shot a suspicious look at the housekeeper, as if she could sense that something important was being discussed without her involvement. She had always had a cordial but distant relationship with Martha Higgins, treating her more like an employee than a family member. "You seem to be discussing something serious." "Nothing you need to worry about," Arthur replied, avoiding elaboration. Margaret approached her husband, placing her hand on his arm in a gesture that seemed more possessive than affectionate. "Arthur, you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" He nodded mechanically, but internally he knew that Margaret could never grasp the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Their relationship had been built on the ruins of a great love, and she had always been more of a convenient companion than a true partner. "I'm going out for a few hours," Arthur announced, grabbing his car keys. "Where are you going?" "To take care of some unfinished business." Margaret noticed the evasion in her husband's answer, but didn't press him. After 8 years of marriage, she had learned not to question too much the times when Arthur closed himself off. Martha Higgins followed Arthur to the garage, still trying to talk him out of his impulsive decision. "Mr. Arthur, Maybe I should go first, to prepare Mrs. Eleanor for this meeting. No, Marty, we've waited long enough. He got into the car with determination, but as soon as he started the engine, a wave of nervousness washed over him. How should he approach a woman he hadn't seen in 23 years? What should he say first? How could he apologize for not fighting harder to find her? The drive to the Decatur neighborhood took 40 minutes in Atlanta's heavy traffic. Arthur watched the streets gradually transform from wide, tree-lined avenues to narrow alleys and simple houses. The disparity between the two worlds was stark. Elm Street was a modest road, lined with small shops and working-class homes. Number 247 housed a small store with a discreet sign, Mary Ann's Sewing, Alterations and Repairs. Arthur parked the car on the corner, feeling his heart beat so loudly it seemed to echo in his ears. Through the simple storefront, he could see a female figure bent over a sewing machine, working intently on a floral fabric. Even from a distance and in profile, he instantly recognized the delicate posture he had loved for so many years. Eleanor was right there, just a few feet away, after more than 2 decades of forced separation. He took a deep breath and pushed the door, setting off a small bell that announced customers. The woman lifted her face, and for a moment that felt eternal. The two stared at each other in absolute silence. Eleanor had changed, but her eyes remained exactly the same. Her hair, once completely black, now had silver strands framing a face that was thinner and marked by daily struggle. Her hands, as Martha Higgins had warned, showed calluses and small scars from manual work. "Arthur?" she whispered, her voice trembling and almost inaudible. "Eleanor." The name left his lips like a prayer, loaded with all the emotions repressed for 23 years. She slowly rose from the chair, as if her movements were controlled by an external force. How did you find me?" "Marty told me everything." Eleanor closed her eyes and brought her hand to her chest, as if she had taken a physical blow. She knew this moment would come eventually, but she wasn't prepared to face it. She shouldn't have done that. "You shouldn't be here." "Why? Because my brother might find out?" The confirmation that Arthur knew the truth made Eleanor collapse. She leaned on the work table, her legs trembling violently. "Arthur, you need to leave. If Gregory finds out you found me..." "Gregory won't know anything. Neither he nor anyone else will separate us again." Arthur slowly approached, as if approaching a frightened animal. Eleanor backed away until her back touched the wall, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. He said if I came back he'd hurt you. He knows dangerous people, Arthur." "That was 23 years ago, Eleanor. Things have changed. People like him don't change, Arthur. They just get smarter." Arthur stopped a few steps away, respecting the space she clearly needed to feel safe. The fear in Eleanor's eyes was genuine and deep, the result of decades living with the constant terror of putting his life at risk. "I read all your letters." Eleanor covered her face with her hands, ashamed that he had discovered her most intimate feelings. "You shouldn't have read that." "Why?" "Because they showed me how much of a fool I was. How much I wasted our life believing you didn't love me anymore." "Because they show how weak I am," she answered between sobs. "A strong woman would have found a way to protect you without having to leave." Arthur felt his heart break, seeing the woman he loved blaming herself for a situation completely out of her control. She had been blackmailed and manipulated, yet still held herself responsible for the tragedy. "You were the stronger one of the two of us, Eleanor. You sacrificed your own happiness to protect me, while I didn't even bother to properly investigate your disappearance. You had no way of knowing. I should have suspected. I should have realized something was wrong. You loved me, I knew that. I should have fought harder to find out the truth." Eleanor looked at him through tears, seeing the genuine guilt etched on the face of the man she had never stopped loving. "Gregory convinced you that I left because I stopped loving you, didn't he?" Arthur nodded, feeling nauseous as he remembered the conversations with his brother in the months following Eleanor's disappearance. Gregory had been the most present advisor, always ready to listen to him vent about his wife's betrayal. He used to say that some women just get tired of married life and decide to start over somewhere else, that I should accept it and move on. "And you moved on," Eleanor said, trying to hide the pain in her voice. "Physically, yes. Emotionally, never. Not even when I married Margaret did I manage to truly love someone else. The confession brought a mix of relief and sadness to Eleanor. Knowing that Arthur hadn't managed to be completely happy with another woman comforted her, but also intensified her guilt for having destroyed so many lives with her forced departure. Is Margaret a good woman? She is convenient, pretty, young, interesting for superficial conversation, but she was never you. They remained silent for a few minutes, absorbing the reality of the reunion. The small sewing shop seemed like a world apart, where time had stopped to allow two souls to reconnect. Arthur, you need to understand that I can't just go home as if nothing happened. Why? Because 23 years have passed. Because you have a life built with someone else. Because Gregory still poses a real threat. Arthur took one more step closer, testing the boundaries of her personal space. And what if I said none of that matters to me? Then I'd say you're being impulsive, just like you always were. A melancholic smile appeared on Arthur's face. It was the first time in 23 years that someone called him impulsive with affection, recalling personality traits that only she knew intimately. Do you remember how we met? Eleanor smiled through her tears, allowing herself for the first time in decades to revisit happy memories. You almost ran me over at the university entrance because you were looking at me more than at the road. And you yelled at me for 10 minutes before accepting that I buy you a coffee as an apology. You insisted so much I thought you were crazy. I was crazy. Crazy in love from the first second I saw you. The nostalgic conversation was gradually relaxing Eleanor, allowing her to lower her emotional defenses a little. Arthur noticed the change and took advantage to step closer. Eleanor, can I touch your hand? She hesitated for a moment before extending her right hand. When Arthur's fingers touched her skin for the first time in 23 years, she had to steady herself against the table to keep from fainting. His hand was rough, marked by years of manual labor, but it was still the same hand that had kissed hers thousands of times during their 15 years of marriage. He brought it to his lips, gently kissing the calloused knuckles. Your poor hands, he murmured, feeling tears burn his eyes. They kept me alive all these years. You shouldn't have had to work like this. You should be at home, tending the garden you loved so much, reading your books on the porch. Arthur, that life ended a long time ago. No, it didn't. It can start again now. Eleanor gently pulled her hand away, creating physical distance once more. You have a wife at home. I have a woman I share a house with. It's not the same thing. To her it is. Eleanor's concern for Margaret surprised Arthur. Even after being forced into exile to protect him, she still showed compassion for a woman who had taken her place. Margaret never truly loved me, Eleanor. She fell in love with the stability I represented, not with me as a person. Even so, she doesn't deserve to be abandoned without an explanation the way I was. The comparison made Arthur realize the cruel irony of the situation. If he left Margaret to go back with Eleanor, he would be repeating the pattern of abandonment that had hurt him so deeply 23 years earlier, even if the circumstances were completely different. You're right. Margaret deserves to know the truth and to have the chance to decide what to do with that information. And Gregory, he could still be dangerous. Arthur thought about his brother, trying to assess whether he still posed a real threat or had just become an opportunistic man living off others' generosity. I'll deal with Gregory. He owes me 23 years of explanations. Arthur, promise me you won't do anything impulsive with him. Why? Do you still care about him after everything he did to us? I don't care about him. I care about you. If you do something you'll regret later, we'll have to carry that extra weight. Eleanor's wisdom, matured by years of suffering and reflection, impressed Arthur. She had learned to think about the long-term consequences of every action, while he still tended to react emotionally. So what do you suggest we do? That you go home, talk to Margaret, sort out your personal life. Then, if you still think it's worth the risk, maybe we can talk about the future. And how long should that take? As long as necessary to do it the right way. Arthur knew Eleanor was being sensible, but the idea of leaving her again, even temporarily, was almost unbearable. He had waited 23 years to find her again. A few more days or weeks felt like an eternity. Can I visit you again? You can, but carefully. If someone sees us together and tells Gregory, I understand. Arthur walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. Eleanor, there's something I need to know. Did you build a new family in all these years? The question he had most feared asking finally left his lips. The possibility that Eleanor had found love and companionship with another man haunted his thoughts. No, she replied simply. I was never able to open my heart to anyone else. The relief Arthur felt was almost physical, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Then we both wasted 23 years of our lives because of one person's cruelty. They weren't wasted, Arthur. They were sacrificed. That's different. He nodded, finally understanding the difference. Wasted time implies bad choices. Sacrificed time implies painful choices made for love. I love you, Eleanor. I never stopped loving you. I love you too, Arthur. But love isn't enough to solve all the problems we'll face ahead. Arthur left the small shop with his heart divided between hope and apprehension. Running into Eleanor again had been the most exciting experience of his life, but it had also highlighted the complexity of the situation they were in. On the way back home, he tried to organize his thoughts and plan the next steps. The conversation with Margaret would be inevitable and probably painful. The confrontation with Gregory would be even harder, especially because Arthur would need to control his anger to avoid doing something rash. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Margaret in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine while watching a TV show. She looked up when he came in, immediately noticing the troubled expression on his face. Arthur, you look worn out. What happened? He sat down in the armchair opposite the sofa where she was, trying to find the right words to start a conversation that would change everything. Margaret, we need to talk about some important things. She closed the magazine and turned off the television, realizing from the seriousness in his tone that it was something significant. Is it about us? Among other things, yes. Margaret settled into the sofa, taking a more defensive posture. During the 8 years of marriage, she had noticed that Arthur never loved her with the same intensity with which she knew he had loved his first wife. But she always hoped that with time, that love would grow naturally. Do you want a divorce? It's not exactly that. It's more complicated than that. Arthur took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would completely shake the life of the woman in front of him. Margaret, I found out today that Eleanor didn't abandon me 23 years ago. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening. Margaret blinked several times as if she hadn't properly processed what she had just heard. What do you mean she didn't abandon you? She was forced to leave to protect me. It was a form of blackmail. Margaret abruptly stood up from the sofa, starting to pace back and forth across the room with nervous steps. Blackmail from whom? From my brother. Gregory? But why? Arthur told the whole story that Martha Higgins had revealed, watching the different emotions play out on Margaret's face. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, a deep sadness. And where is she now? Margaret asked, though she already suspected the answer. Here in Atlanta. I met her today. Margaret stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes shining with held-back tears. And you still love her? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Arthur knew that lying at that moment would be an unnecessary cruelty. Yes. The confirmation hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. She let herself fall back onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. I always knew you didn't love me completely. I always felt there was a place in your heart that belonged to someone else. But I believed that with time. Margaret, you didn't do anything wrong. You are a wonderful woman and deserve to be deeply loved by someone. I just can't be that someone. She raised her face, revealing tears that had finally overflowed. 8 years, Arthur. 8 years of my life invested in a marriage that never had a chance to work. I know, and I'm sorry for that. When we got married, I genuinely believed I could learn to love you the way you deserved. But you never managed to forget her. Never. Margaret stood up again, but this time with more determination than despair. I want to meet her. What? If I'm going to lose my marriage to a woman, I at least want to know who she is. The request completely surprised Arthur. He had imagined Margaret would be furious, make a scene, try to stop him from seeing Eleanor again. The last thing he expected was for her to want to meet her rival. Margaret, I don't think that's a good idea. Why? Afraid I'll cause a scene? It's not that. It's just that the situation is already complicated enough without adding more tension. Arthur, for 8 years I've lived in the shadow of a woman I've never seen. At least now I want to put a face to the person who has always been more important to you than me. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Margaret's determination was unshakable, and Arthur realized that trying to dissuade her would be useless. If she really wanted to meet Eleanor, maybe it was better for it to happen in a controlled and civilized manner. All right, but I'll warn Eleanor first, so she can prepare herself mentally. Thank you. Margaret went upstairs, leaving Arthur alone in the living room with his conflicting thoughts. The day had started like any other and turned into the most dramatic turning point of his adult life. Martha Higgins appeared at the living room door, watching her employer with a worried expression. How did the meeting go, Mr. Arthur? Complicated, Marty. Very complicated. Was she scared? Very, and rightly so. Gregory still poses a real threat to all of us. The housekeeper stepped closer, wiping her hands on her apron in a nervous gesture. What are you going to do about Mr. Gregory? I don't know yet. Eleanor asked me not to do anything impulsive. She's right, sir. People like him can be unpredictable when they feel cornered. Arthur agreed, although every fiber of his being cried out for immediate justice. Gregory had destroyed his family and profited financially from that destruction for 23 years. The temptation to confront him publicly and demand explanations was almost irresistible. Marty, Margaret wants to meet Eleanor. The housekeeper's eyes widened, clearly not expecting that piece of information. Mrs. Margaret? But why? Curiosity, perhaps, or a need for closure, as they say. And did Mrs. Eleanor agree? I haven't spoken to her about it yet. I'll call to let her know. Arthur realized he didn't have Eleanor's phone number. During all the years of separation, contact between her and Martha Higgins had been made in person on the housekeeper's days off. Does she have a phone at the store? No, sir. Just an old cell phone that almost never works. Then could you go there early tomorrow and let her know about Margaret's visit? Martha Higgins hesitated, afraid that the meeting between the two wives could result in conflict and additional complications. Sir, is that prudent? Probably not. But Margaret is determined, and I think it's better for it to happen under our supervision than for her to decide to go on her own. The housekeeper reluctantly agreed, seeing the logic of the argument. Margaret had shown over the years that she could be quite stubborn when she wanted something, and trying to stop her from meeting Eleanor could result in a less diplomatic approach. That night, Arthur barely managed to sleep. Lying next to Margaret, who was also tossing and turning in bed without finding sleep, he reflected on how their lives had changed completely in a matter of hours. The existence he had carefully built over 8 years was crumbling, but strangely, he didn't feel panic. It was as if he were finally waking up from a long, confusing dream to discover that reality, though more complicated, was also more true. Margaret, for her part, oscillated between anger, sadness, and a strange curiosity about the woman who had secretly dominated her husband's heart throughout their entire marriage. She had always known that Arthur treated her with affection, but never with passion. Now she understood why. The next morning, Martha Higgins left early for the sewing shop, carrying a message from Arthur to Eleanor about Margaret's intention to meet her. The response came through a handwritten note in the same handwriting he had recognized in the letters. Arthur, if this woman was important to you all these years, I would like to meet her too. Perhaps we can talk as two people who loved the same man and find a civilized way to handle this situation. Tell her she can come to the shop on Wednesday morning when there's less movement. Eleanor's generosity once again surprised Arthur. Even though she had been the most aggrieved in this whole situation, she was willing to face the discomfort of meeting her replacement in the name of civility. Margaret read the note several times, searching in the chosen words for clues about Eleanor's personality. "She seems like a well-mannered woman," Margaret commented. "She always was, and very brave too. She had to be to endure 23 years alone protecting a man who was cursing her for abandoning him." Margaret's observation showed an understanding of the situation that Arthur did not expect. He had assumed she would react with jealousy or resentment, but she was showing impressive emotional maturity. "Aren't you angry?" "I am, but not at the two of you. I'm angry at Gregory and at the circumstances, and mostly at myself for marrying a man who never hid that he still loved someone else." "Margaret, no, Arthur. Let me speak. When we met, you were clearly suffering because of your first wife. I thought I could heal you, that my love would be enough to make you forget the past. That was arrogance on my part." Arthur was impressed by Margaret's brutal honesty. During 8 years of marriage, she had kept these reflections to herself, pretending not to notice the emotional distance he maintained. "You weren't arrogant. You were generous in trying to love a wounded man. And you were a coward to marry me, knowing you didn't love me completely." The accusation was fair, and Arthur did not try to defend himself. He had married Margaret in a moment of loneliness and despair, mistakenly believing that he could learn to love her with the intensity she deserved. "You're right. I'm sorry. I don't want your apologies, Arthur. I just want that from now on, we be honest with each other about our feelings and intentions." Arthur agreed, admiring the strength of character that Margaret was showing in one of the most difficult situations a married woman can face. Wednesday arrived with a palpable tension in the house. Margaret dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were elegant but not ostentatious, as if she were preparing for an important job interview. Arthur accompanied her to the sewing shop, driving in silence through the streets that connected the two different worlds where the two women had lived. When they arrived at Elm Street, Margaret observed the neighborhood carefully, trying to imagine what it would be like to live there, after being accustomed to the luxury of the upscale neighborhoods of Atlanta. "It's very different from our house," she commented. "Eleanor didn't have a choice. She had to live discreetly, and with the money she could earn sewing." Margaret nodded, beginning to understand the magnitude of the sacrifice the first wife had made. Giving up a comfortable life to live on the outskirts, working manually to survive, required a strength of character that she didn't know if she possessed. They entered the small shop together. Eleanor was arranging some fabrics on a shelf and turned around when she heard the doorbell. Her eyes first met Arthur's, then fixed on Margaret. The two women studied each other for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Margaret saw a 48-year-old woman who had aged prematurely due to life's hardships, but who still maintained a natural beauty and an impressive dignity. Eleanor saw a younger, well-cared-for woman with expensive clothes and professionally styled hair, but whose eyes revealed a deep sadness. "You must be Margaret," said Eleanor, extending her hand. "And you are Eleanor. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The greeting was cordial but formal, both clearly tense with the unusual situation. "Please have a seat," offered Eleanor, pointing to two simple chairs she had placed near the counter. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "Thank you," replied Margaret, surprised by the hospitality of the woman who might have reasons to hate her. While Eleanor prepared a simple coffee in a thermos she kept in the shop, Margaret observed the surroundings. It was a small but organized space, with old but well-maintained sewing machines and shelves full of fabrics, threads, and accessories. "You've built a respectable business here," commented Margaret. "Thank you. It's not much, but it allows me to live with dignity." Arthur remained silent, fascinated to watch the two most important women of his adult life interacting for the first time. "Eleanor," said Margaret, getting straight to the point, "I wanted to meet you because I need to understand something. Feel free to ask. How did you manage to love Arthur intensely enough to sacrifice 23 years of your life for him?" The question caught everyone by surprise, including Margaret, who hadn't planned to be so direct. Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. True love is not something you achieve or decide to have, Margaret. It's something that simply happens and becomes part of who you are. When I love someone, their well-being becomes more important than my own. Even when that means giving up your own happiness. Yes, because seeing him happy made me happy, even from a distance. Knowing that he was safe, even if it was with someone else, was worth more than being with him and risking seeing him suffer. Margaret absorbed the answer, trying to compare it with her own feelings toward Arthur. She loved him, but would she be capable of such a sacrifice? And don't you feel anger that he married someone else? I did at first, but then I understood that he needed to move on, try to be happy. You took care of him all these years when I couldn't. I'm grateful for that. Eleanor's generosity left Margaret even more confused about her own feelings. It was hard to hold a grudge against a woman who showed such nobility of character. Eleanor, can I ask a personal question? Sure. Do you intend to try to win Arthur back? Eleanor looked at Arthur before answering, noticing the anxiety in his eyes. You don't win back someone who never stopped loving you, Margaret. But that doesn't automatically mean we'll become a couple again. A lot has changed in 23 years. Like the fact that he's married to me. Exactly. And I wouldn't be able to destroy another woman's life the same way mine was destroyed. Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing he was being discussed as if he weren't there. And if I decided to voluntarily step away? Asked Margaret. Why? Eleanor wanted to know. Because after this conversation I understood that I never truly had my husband's heart. I always knew that, but I refused to accept it. Now I see that you two have something I could never compete with. Margaret, interrupted Arthur, you don't need to make hasty decisions. They aren't hasty, Arthur. They're decisions I should have made years ago, when I realized you could never love me the way I loved you. Eleanor watched the exchange between Arthur and Margaret, noticing the complex dynamics of their relationship. It was clear there was mutual affection, but it lacked the deep passion she and Arthur had once shared. Margaret, may I offer a suggestion? Please, don't make any major decisions today. This situation is new and emotional for all of us. Give yourself some time for your feelings to settle before deciding anything. And how much time do you think would be necessary? Whatever your heart says. It could be a week, a month, a year. There's no rush. Arthur was surprised by Eleanor's suggestion. He had imagined that after 23 years apart, she would be eager to resolve things quickly. But Eleanor, he said, we've already waited long enough. We waited because we had to, Arthur. Now we have the freedom to choose the right timing for each decision. Eleanor's wisdom once again impressed everyone present. She had learned through suffering the importance of making thoughtful decisions rather than acting on impulse. Margaret finished her coffee and stood up to leave. Eleanor, thank you for this conversation. You helped me clarify many things about myself. It was a pleasure meeting you, Margaret. You're a strong woman, and you deserve to be completely happy. You deserve it too. The two women said goodbye with a brief but genuine hug, leaving Arthur impressed by the emotional maturity both had shown. On the way back home, Margaret remained silent for a long time before speaking. She's exactly as I imagined. What do you mean? Dignified, generous, brave. All the qualities you've always valued, and that I tried to develop in myself. Margaret, you have your own wonderful qualities. Maybe, but they aren't the qualities that make someone fall hopelessly in love. Arthur didn't know how to respond because he knew she was right. Margaret was intelligent, beautiful, and caring, but she didn't spark in him the overwhelming passion that Eleanor had always stirred. What are you going to do now? He asked. I'm going to spend a few days at my mother's house to think clearly away from all this. For how long? I don't know yet. Maybe until I decide what I want to do with the rest of my life. Arthur respected Margaret's decision, understanding that she needed space to process all the revelations of the past few days. That afternoon, after Margaret had left for her mother's house carrying a suitcase with clothes for a few days, Arthur found himself alone in the mansion for the first time in years. The house felt strange and silent, as if waiting for changes that hadn't yet happened. Martha Higgins prepared a simple dinner and retired to her quarters early, sensing that her boss needed time to reflect alone. Arthur spent the night rereading Eleanor's letters, trying to fully understand the 23 years of separation they had lost. Each letter revealed a different layer of her suffering, but also of her strength and determination. In a letter from 5 years ago, she wrote, "Today I saw you from a distance at the supermarket with Margaret. She was picking out fruit while you pushed the cart, and for a moment you looked like a normal couple doing household shopping. My first impulse was jealousy, but then I felt immense gratitude for seeing that you weren't alone. Even if it wasn't with me, you had someone taking care of you." Eleanor's ability to feel gratitude instead of bitterness in the face of being replaced demonstrated a spiritual growth Arthur deeply admired. In another letter, more recent, she revealed, "Arthur, sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice by leaving without explanation. Maybe if I had stayed and faced Gregory together, we would have found a solution. But the fear that something might happen to you was greater than my desire to stay. I prefer to carry the guilt of abandoning you rather than risk losing you forever." Arthur understood that Eleanor had spent 23 years questioning her decisions, just as he had spent 23 years questioning his. Both had carried unnecessary guilt over a situation that was beyond their control. On Thursday morning, he decided it was time to confront Gregory. The conversation couldn't be postponed indefinitely, and the more time passed, the harder it would be to control his emotions. Gregory lived in a luxurious apartment in the Buckhead neighborhood, bought with money Arthur had lent him over the years to help his brother in need. The irony of Gregory using the victim's money to finance his new life was revolting. Arthur knocked on the door at 9 in the morning, knowing that Gregory rarely woke up early. It took a few minutes for the door to open, revealing a 47-year-old man still in his pajamas, looking like he had been drinking the night before. "Arthur? What are you doing here so early?" "I need to talk to you about some pending matters." Gregory noticed something different in his brother's tone of voice, but couldn't quite identify what it was. "Sure, come in. Want some coffee?" "No. This won't take long." They sat down in the living room, decorated with expensive furniture and artworks that Gregory had acquired over the past few years. Arthur looked around at the luxury, feeling nauseated thinking about the origin of the money that had financed this lifestyle. "Gregory, I've discovered the truth about Eleanor's disappearance." The change in his brother's expression was instantaneous. The drowsiness completely vanished from his eyes, replaced by alert vigilance. "What truth? About the blackmail, about the forged documents, about how you forced my wife to flee to protect me?" Gregory turned pale but tried to maintain his composure. "Arthur, I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop lying, Gregory. I've already talked to Eleanor. I know everything." You found her?" The confirmation that Arthur had reunited with Eleanor visibly unnerved Gregory. He got up from the armchair and started pacing the room, his hands trembling slightly. "Where has she been all these years?" "Here in Atlanta, working as a seamstress to survive, while you lived comfortably off the money I lent you. Arthur, you have to understand, I was desperate. I owed a lot of money to dangerous people. And what was the solution? Destroy my family to save your own skin?" Gregory stopped pacing and stared at his brother, knowing there was no way to deny or minimize his actions anymore. "I didn't want it to come to this. I tried other options first." "Like what?" "I applied for bank loans, tried to sell my car, reached out to other relatives. None of it was enough." "So you decided to blackmail Eleanor?" "I had no choice. First they threatened to break my legs, then they said they would come after you." Arthur tried to control the anger boiling in his veins. Gregory's self-pity, trying to portray himself as a victim of circumstances, was revolting. "You had a choice, Gregory. You could have told me the truth and asked for help. And would you have given me the money?" "Probably yes, but that would never justify what you did to Eleanor." Gregory dropped back into the armchair, covering his face with his hands. "I know I did a terrible thing, Arthur. Not a day goes by that I don't think about it. If you truly regretted it, you would have found a way to undo the harm you caused. How? Eleanor made me swear I would never reveal where she was. She was more afraid of the people I owed money to than of me. And are those people still a threat? Gregory hesitated before answering, as if weighing the risks of revealing more information. I don't know, I lost touch with them after I paid off my debts. With what money? With the loans you gave me over the years. The confirmation that Arthur had inadvertently financed the payment of the debts that led to his own wife's exile hit him like a punch in the gut. So I paid for the debts that cost me my family. Arthur, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I was young, desperate. You weren't young, Gregory. You were 24 when it happened, old enough to know right from wrong. Gregory realized that all his attempts to justify or downplay his actions were being dismissed by his brother. Arthur wasn't interested in explanations or excuses, only in confirming the truth. What do you want from me now? I want you to tell me exactly how you convinced Eleanor to leave. Gregory took a deep breath, knowing he would have to relive one of the most shameful moments of his life. I showed her forged documents that appeared to have your signature on fraudulent business deals. I told her that if she didn't disappear, those documents would be handed over to the authorities, and you'd be arrested for corruption and money laundering. And she believed you? Not at first. She said she knew your character and that you would never get involved in anything illegal. But when I showed her fake evidence of offshore accounts and inflated construction contracts, she started to get scared. What kind of evidence? Falsified bank statements, forged emails, documents with your signature copied. The people I owed money to had connections in the forgery world. Arthur tried to imagine Eleanor's desperation when confronted with such convincing evidence of crimes she knew he would never commit, but that could destroy him if taken to the authorities. And she agreed to leave immediately. No. She asked for time to think, said she wanted to talk to you first. That's when I had to use the cruelest argument. Which was? I said that if she told you anything, the people threatening me would consider that you were involved in trying to expose them, and that they wouldn't hesitate to physically hurt you to make an example. Arthur understood how skillfully Gregory had manipulated Eleanor's fears, using her love for him as a weapon against her. And she agreed to leave without further question. She cried a lot, begged me to find another solution. But when I said you could die if she didn't disappear, she agreed. How did you arrange the disappearance? I told her she needed to leave the house as if she were going about any normal activity, without packing bags or leaving any clues about her destination, that she would have to live under a false identity until I could resolve the situation. And when did you plan to resolve the situation? Gregory lowered his eyes, ashamed. I never planned to resolve it. Once she had left and I managed to pay my debts, I thought it would be best to leave things as they were. The confession of Gregory's premeditation to keep Eleanor permanently in exile was the most shocking revelation of all. He hadn't just forced a desperate situation, he had deliberately planned to destroy his brother's marriage forever. You never intended to let her come back. Arthur, you need to understand that. No! Arthur exploded, standing up abruptly. There's no explanation that can justify what you did. You deliberately destroyed my family and pretended to be my advisor and friend for 23 years. Gregory stepped back, seeing a fury in his brother he had never witnessed before. I know you're angry. Angry? This goes far beyond anger, Gregory. This is betrayal in its vilest form. What are you going to do now? Arthur stopped walking and stared at his brother with a mix of contempt and sorrow. I'm going to give you the same chance you gave Eleanor 23 years ago. What do you mean? You have 24 hours to leave Atlanta permanently. I don't want to see you in my city, my home, or my life anymore. Gregory was shocked by the ultimatum. Arthur, this is my city too. I have friends here, business funded with my money, built on the lie you created. As for your friends, I'm sure they'll understand when they find out what you did. You're going to tell everyone? I'll tell whoever asks. I don't intend to protect your reputation the same way Eleanor protected mine. Gregory realized Arthur was serious. The determination in his voice was unshakable. And if I refuse to leave, then I'll make this whole story public, starting with our family and our mutual friends. I'll let everyone know exactly what kind of person you are. The threat of public exposure hit Gregory where it hurt most, his social reputation. For 23 years he had presented himself as the supportive brother who helped Arthur get over his wife's betrayal. Arthur, maybe we can find a way to resolve this without going to extremes. The only way to resolve this is for you to disappear from my life the same way you forced Eleanor to disappear. Gregory tried a few more desperate arguments, but he realized Arthur had made an irreversible decision. The brother he had manipulated for decades had finally discovered the truth and was not willing to forgive or forget. Where should I go? Anywhere, as long as it's far from here. São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, another country. I don't care as long as it's permanent. And what about my assets here? Sell everything and use the money to start over somewhere else. Consider it your compensation for 23 years of lies. Gregory understood he had completely lost control of the situation. His older brother, who had always been generous and forgiving, was showing a relentless side he had never seen before. Arthur, I genuinely regret what I did. Your regret won't give back the 23 years Eleanor and I lost together. It won't erase the suffering you caused an innocent woman. But maybe it could be the start of a way to make up for it. The only compensation I'll accept is your permanent absence from my life. Arthur walked toward the door but stopped before leaving. Gregory, you have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to leave the city. If I find out you're still here after that, I'll take more drastic measures. What kind of measures? The kind you don't want to find out. Arthur left the apartment without looking back, leaving Gregory alone with the magnitude of the consequences that had finally caught up to him. On the drive back home, Arthur felt strangely liberated. Confronting Gregory had been painful but necessary. The brother he had loved and protected his whole life had revealed himself to be a stranger capable of the worst betrayals. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Martha Higgins waiting anxiously in the living room. How did the conversation with Mr. Gregory go? Revealing, Marty. He confessed everything. And what are you going to do? I gave him 24 hours to leave Atlanta permanently. Martha Higgins was surprised by the harshness of the measure, but she understood that Arthur needed to take a radical stance to protect his possible reconciliation with Eleanor. And Mrs. Margaret? She's still at her mother's house, deciding what to do about the marriage. And Mrs. Eleanor? I'm going to visit her this afternoon to tell her about the conversation with Gregory. The housekeeper smiled for the first time in days, seeing real hope that the family she had served faithfully for 23 years could finally be reunited. Mr. Arthur, can I say something? Of course, Marty. Mrs. Eleanor never stopped loving you. All these years she talked about you as if you'd only separated yesterday, not decades ago. And I never stopped loving her, even without knowing the truth. Then maybe you have a chance to make up for lost time. Arthur hoped Martha Higgins was right. After 23 years of suffering based on lies, he and Eleanor deserved an opportunity to find out if they could still build a life together. That afternoon he returned to the sewing shop, carrying a simple bouquet of flowers he bought at a neighborhood flower shop. He wanted to show respect for the environment where Eleanor had rebuilt her life. She was helping a customer when he arrived, explaining the details of a repair on a skirt. Arthur watched her work, impressed by the competence and patience she showed. After the customer left, Eleanor turned to Arthur with a shy smile. What beautiful flowers, for the most beautiful woman I know. She blushed slightly, no longer used to receiving compliments after so many years alone. How was your conversation with Gregory? Arthur told her all the details of his brother's confession, watching the different emotions passing over Eleanor's face. Relief at finally having the truth revealed, sadness at the family betrayal, and worry about the possible consequences. Do you think he'll really leave the city? I'm sure of it. Gregory has always been a coward. When faced with the consequences of his actions, he chooses to run away instead of facing them. And what if he decides to cause trouble before he leaves? What kind of trouble? I don't know. But people like him, when they feel cornered, can do unpredictable things. Eleanor's concern was understandable. For 23 years, she had lived in fear of Gregory's reactions if he found out she was still in the city. "Eleanor, I won't let him hurt you again." "How can you be sure?" "Because this time I know the truth, and this time you're not alone." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes as she heard the words she had dreamed of hearing for over 2 decades. "Arthur, even if Gregory leaves town, we still have many obstacles ahead." "Like what?" "Your wife, for example. You can't just abandon her as if she were disposable. Margaret is deciding for herself what she wants to do. I offered her all the time she needs. And if she decides to fight for the marriage?" Arthur thought about the conversation Margaret had had with Eleanor, remembering the maturity and understanding his second wife had shown. "I don't think she'll do that. Margaret is an intelligent woman and realized that our marriage never had the emotional depth she deserved. But still, she has rights. You built a life together for 8 years. Eleanor's concern for Margaret's rights again showed her generosity of spirit, even toward the woman who had taken her place. "Eleanor, you don't need to worry about Margaret more than she herself is worrying." "It's hard not to worry. I know how painful it is to be the abandoned woman in a situation like this." Arthur understood that Eleanor was projecting onto Margaret her own feelings from 23 years ago, when she believed she was being abandoned out of lovelessness. "The situation is completely different, Eleanor. Margaret always knew I still loved you. She married me hoping that love would fade over time. And she accepts that it never did? She's learning to accept it." Eleanor moved closer to the store window, watching the street traffic while organizing her thoughts. "Arthur, assuming all external obstacles are resolved, there remains a more important issue." "What?" "We've changed a lot in 23 years. Are we still compatible as a couple?" The question Arthur had avoided asking himself was finally verbalized. Was it possible that 2 people who had evolved separately for over 2 decades could still relate intimately? There's only one way to find out. How? Spending time together, talking, relearning each other, seeing if the chemistry is still there between us. And if we find it's not, then at least we'll have tried instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering, what if? Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of the proposal. They had lost 23 years because of external circumstances. It would be an even greater tragedy to miss the opportunity for a reunion out of fear of discovering uncomfortable truths. "Where do we start? How about dinner? A real date, like 2 free adults exploring the possibility of a relationship." "Free is a strong word, considering you're still married." Margaret said our conversation freed her to make decisions about her own future. I consider that frees me too. Eleanor hesitated, torn between the desire to accept the invitation and concern about the ethical implications of the situation. "Arthur, I wouldn't feel comfortable going out with you while you're still officially married to another woman, even knowing the marriage is already over in practice. Especially because of that. If we're going to try to build something together, I want it to be on honest and transparent foundations." Eleanor's integrity once again impressed Arthur. Even after 23 years of sacrifices, she refused to compromise her moral principles. "So what do you suggest?" "That you definitively resolve your situation with Margaret before we attempt any kind of romantic reconnection. And, in the meantime, we can be friends who are reconnecting. We can talk, reminisce about the past, get to know the people we've become, but without romantic pressure or expectations beyond that." Arthur reluctantly agreed, understanding that Eleanor was being sensible even if it meant delaying their possible reconciliation even further. "Can I at least visit you regularly?" "You can, but as a friend, not as a suitor. And if I find I can't see you just as a friend?" Eleanor smiled for the first time in a completely natural way since their reunion. "Then you'll have to deal with that difficulty until you resolve your marital situation." Arthur laughed, recognizing the slightly teasing tone Eleanor used when she wanted to test his limits. "You were always cruel to my feelings, and you were always impatient with necessary processes." The affectionate banter brought back a familiar dynamic both had forgotten during the years of separation. It was as if their spirits recognized each other, even though their bodies and minds had changed. Arthur spent another hour in the store, helping Eleanor organize some fabrics while they talked about neutral subjects: the neighborhood where she lived, her regular sewing clients, the changes Atlanta had undergone over the past few years. When he said goodbye, he gently kissed her forehead, a gesture that had been common between them during their marriage. "See you tomorrow," he said. "See you tomorrow," she replied, unconsciously touching the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. Arthur left the shop with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he was frustrated by the need to wait for the bureaucratic resolution of his marriage to Margaret. On the other hand, he admired Eleanor's integrity and knew she was right to insist that things be done the proper way. On the way back home, he reflected on how to approach Margaret when she returned from her mother's house. The conversation would be delicate, as it would involve practical matters like property division, but also emotional issues like the dissolution of a relationship that, despite its limitations, had meant something to both of them. That evening, Arthur received a call from Margaret. "Arthur, can I talk to you?" "Of course, how are you?" "Confused, but also clearer about some things. Can I come home tomorrow? We have a lot to discuss." "Of course you can. This is your home too." "For now, yes, but maybe not for long." The statement revealed that Margaret had made some decisions during her days of reflection, but Arthur decided not to press for details over the phone. "Let's talk in person tomorrow, calmly." "Okay." "Arthur?" "Yes?" "Thank you for being honest with me about your feelings. It hurt, but it was necessary. Margaret, you deserve all the honesty in the world, and much more than I was able to give you during our marriage." After the call, Arthur felt hopeful that the conversation with Margaret could be conducted maturely and respectfully, without accusations or attempts at emotional manipulation. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday morning, Arthur woke up with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Margaret had promised to come home in the afternoon, and they would finally have the definitive conversation about the future of their marriage. Martha Higgins noticed her boss's nervousness and prepared an especially careful breakfast, as she always did when she sensed he was going through tough times. "Mr. Arthur, is Mrs. Margaret coming back today?" "Yes, Marty, and we'll probably decide how to proceed with our separation." "Are you sure that's what she wants?" "No, but it's what I want." Aunt Margaret is too smart to fight for a marriage where she isn't completely loved. The housekeeper nodded sadly. She had grown fond of Margaret over the years, despite always feeling that Arthur's heart belonged to someone else. "She's a good woman, sir." "Yes, she is. And she deserves to find someone who loves her with the intensity she deserves." At 4 in the afternoon, Margaret arrived with a small suitcase and a serene expression that Arthur hadn't seen in a long time. She seemed to have found inner peace during her days of reflection. "How were the days at your mother's house?" "Enlightening. My mother helped me see some things I was refusing to accept." They sat in the living room, the same one where they had had the first conversation about Eleanor a few days earlier, but the atmosphere was completely different now. "Margaret, have you come to any conclusion about what you want to do?" "I have. I want a divorce." The direct statement surprised Arthur because of the absence of drama or hesitation in her voice. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. It's past time to stop fighting for a love that was never fully mine." "Margaret, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. You were honest with me from the beginning about still loving Eleanor. I was the one who believed I could change that." Arthur admired Margaret's maturity once again. It was clear that the days of reflection had given her a clearer perspective on the situation. "How would you like to handle the process in a civilized and fair way? I don't want fights over money or property. I just want my freedom back." "And where do you plan to live?" "I'm going to buy a smaller apartment, maybe downtown. I want to start over completely." Arthur was impressed by the well-structured plans Margaret had developed during his absence. "Can I help financially with this move?" "No need. I have my own savings and I'll manage to get on my feet. Besides, I don't want anything that might complicate our separation." Margaret, you're entitled to alimony and a share of the assets we built together. I don't want alimony. As for the assets, we can do a simple division. I keep my car and my clothes. You keep the rest. Margaret's generosity in giving up legal rights she definitely had moved Arthur deeply. That's not fair to you. It is fair. I entered this marriage knowing you still loved someone else. I knowingly took the risk. Even so, Arthur, let me leave this situation with my dignity intact. I don't want to be seen as the ex-wife who tried to squeeze money out of her husband. Arthur reluctantly agreed, respecting Margaret's wish to handle the separation on her own terms. When would you like to finalize the divorce? As soon as possible. I've already consulted a lawyer, and since we agree on everything, it can be settled in a few weeks. And you... are you okay with all this? Margaret smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I'm better than I've been in years, Arthur. For the first time in a long time, I feel free to be completely honest about my feelings. What do you mean? I can admit that our marriage didn't make me completely happy either. I pretended not to notice your emotional distance, but it hurt me every day. Arthur realized that Margaret had suffered silently for years, trying to maintain a marriage that wasn't fulfilling for either of them. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I was afraid of losing you, even though I knew I never truly had you. Margaret, I'm sorry I was so selfish. You weren't selfish, Arthur. You were honest about your limitations. I was the one who chose to accept less than I deserved. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, during which they discussed practical details of the separation and also revisited good moments they had shared during the 8 years of marriage. When Martha Higgins appeared to offer dinner, Margaret got up to leave. I'm going to sleep at the hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll come get my personal things. Margaret, you don't have to leave the house today. This is still your home. No, Arthur. From now on, this is the house where you'll rebuild your life with Eleanor. I don't belong here anymore. Arthur walked her to the car, feeling a strange melancholy as he watched Margaret drive away. Despite the limitations of their relationship, she had been an important companion during a difficult phase of his life. Margaret, I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve. And I hope you and Eleanor manage to recover the happiness you lost. They hugged for the last time as husband and wife, a hug filled with mutual gratitude and relief at finally having the courage to end a cycle that had extended beyond its natural time. After Margaret left, Arthur sat in the mansion's garden looking at the flowers she had planted over the years. It was strange to think that in a few weeks he would be legally free to try to rebuild his life with Eleanor. Martha Higgins approached with a cup of tea, sensing that her boss needed quiet company. How are you feeling? Relieved, but also sad. Margaret is a good person, and I'm sorry I couldn't love her the way she deserved. Sometimes the heart just doesn't listen to reason, Mr. Arthur. That's true, but it doesn't lessen the guilt I feel for wasting 8 years of her life. You didn't waste them, sir. Those years taught important things to both of you. Arthur hoped Martha Higgins was right. It was comforting to think the years with Margaret hadn't been completely useless, even if they hadn't resulted in the deep love she was looking for. On Saturday morning, he visited Eleanor with news about his conversation with Margaret. He found her reorganizing the store, getting it ready for a week of work. How did Margaret react when you told her about the divorce? She was the one who asked for the divorce. Eleanor stopped what she was doing and turned to face him, surprised. Really? Completely serious. She said it was high time to stop fighting for a love that was never fully hers. What a brave woman. She really is, and very generous too. She's giving up financial rights that she definitely has. Eleanor was thoughtful for a moment, absorbing the implications of Margaret's decision. How soon will the divorce be finalized? A few weeks, according to the lawyer she consulted. And after that? Arthur moved closer to Eleanor, but respecting the personal space she had established. After that, I'd like to be able to court you properly. Court me? She laughed. We're mature adults, Arthur. I think we can skip the teenage dating phase. So what do you suggest? That we spend time together as friends who are rediscovering each other. No rush, no pressure, just seeing where our feelings take us naturally. For how long? for as long as it takes to be sure we really want to rebuild a life together." Arthur agreed, though his impatience was obvious. After 23 years apart, a few more weeks or months felt like an eternity. "Can I visit you every day?" "You can, but not as an obligation. I want you to come only when you truly want to see me. Then I'll be here every day," he said, making her smile. In the weeks that followed, Arthur and Eleanor developed a pleasant routine. He visited the store every afternoon, sometimes helping with small tasks, other times just chatting while she worked. Gradually, they began to explore activities outside the store, lunches at simple neighborhood restaurants, walks in nearby parks, visits to places that had been important during their original marriage. Each encounter revealed layers of personality that had developed during the years of separation. Eleanor had become more independent and resilient, while Arthur had developed a patience and emotional depth he didn't have before. "You've changed a lot," Eleanor observed during a lunch. "For the better?" "Definitely. You were very impulsive when we were married. Now you think more before you act. Suffering teaches, and you've changed too." "How?" "You were always strong, but now you're strong in a calmer way. Less anxious, more confident. I had to learn to trust myself during all those years alone." Their conversations flowed naturally, covering both memories of the past and plans for the future. Slowly, the original chemistry was being rediscovered and enhanced by the maturity they had both gained. A month after this phase of reacquaintance began, Arthur received the call he had been waiting for. The lawyer confirmed that his divorce from Margaret had been finalized. He rushed to the sewing shop with the divorce papers in hand, eager to share the news with Eleanor. "I'm officially free," he announced, holding out the documents. Eleanor examined the papers carefully, as if wanting to make sure everything was truly resolved. "Congratulations, how do you feel?" "Free and hopeful." "Hopeful about what?" "About us. Now we can seriously think about the future." Eleanor folded the documents carefully and handed them back to Arthur. "I still think we should take it slow." "Eleanor, we've waited 23 years. Isn't that enough time?" "We waited due to external circumstances, Arthur. Now we're choosing to wait to do things right." Arthur sighed, acknowledging that Eleanor was being sensible, even if his patience was wearing thin. "So what do you consider doing things right? How about we start by living together?" The suggestion completely surprised Arthur. "Living together? I thought you wanted to take it slow." "Taking it slow doesn't mean not moving forward. I think it's time we test our compatibility in everyday life." "Would you move into the mansion?" Eleanor hesitated, thinking about the symbolism of returning to the house she had been forced to leave 23 years earlier. "Actually, I think it would be better to start in a neutral place, a place that's ours, not yours or mine. Do you have any suggestions?" "How about we look for a smaller, cozier house? Something that reflects who we are today, not who we were in the past." The idea of starting over in a completely new environment appealed to Arthur. It would be a symbolic way to leave the past behind and build something genuinely new. "When do we start looking?" "Immediately, if you want." Arthur hugged Eleanor for the first time since their reunion, a hug loaded with relief, hope, and rediscovered love. "I love you so much, Eleanor." "I love you too, Arthur. I always have." The hug lasted several minutes, during which both allowed the emotions repressed for decades to finally flow freely. When they pulled apart, there were tears of joy in both their eyes. "You know what moves me the most about this situation?" asked Eleanor. "What?" "That we'll have the chance to grow old together. When I left, you were 29 and I was 25. Now we have grey hair and wrinkles, but we still have many years ahead." "The best years," agreed Arthur, "because now we know the value of what we have." They spent the rest of the afternoon making practical plans for the future. They discussed what kind of house to look for, how Arthur would handle the situation with the mansion, and when Eleanor could close her sewing shop. "Will you miss the works?" asked Arthur. "I'll miss the independence it gave me, but I won't miss having to work so hard just to get by." "You don't have to stop working if you don't want to. You can turn sewing into a hobby or a smaller business." "Maybe. But first I want some time to simply enjoy being with you again." Arthur agreed, understanding Eleanor's desire to savor the freedom they had regained. Over the following days, They visited several houses for sale in middle-class neighborhoods of Atlanta. They wanted something comfortable but not ostentatious, with a garden where Eleanor could once again grow her plants. The perfect house appeared in the second week of searching. It was a single-story residence in a quiet community, with 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a modern kitchen and a backyard garden perfectly suited for gardening. "It's perfect," said Eleanor, as soon as they entered the house. "Are you sure?" "It's quite different from the mansion where we lived before." "That's exactly why it's perfect. This house represents a new beginning, not an attempt to recreate the past." Arthur made an offer that same day, and in 2 weeks, the purchase was finalized. At the same time, he put the mansion up for sale, realizing it made no sense to keep such a large property loaded with conflicting memories. Martha Higgins was initially worried about the changes, fearing she might lose the job that had supported her family for over 2 decades. "Marty," said Arthur, "do you think you could manage a smaller house?" "Of course, Mr. Arthur, but why?" "Because Eleanor and I are going to need someone to help us in the new house, if you want to, of course." Martha Higgins felt tears of relief burning her eyes. "Are you offering me a job at the new house?" "I'm not offering you a job, Marty. I'm offering you a place in our family. You've been family for 23 years. The housekeeper hugged Arthur emotionally, realizing that her decades of loyalty were being recognized and rewarded. "Did Mrs. Eleanor agree to this?" "It was her idea. She said you're the only person who knows us both well enough to help us readjust." The move to the new house happened on a sunny Saturday in May. Arthur had sold most of the mansion's furniture, keeping only pieces with sentimental value. Eleanor brought few belongings from the small house where she had lived during the years of exile. The new residence was decorated with a harmonious mix of antique pieces and new furniture, creating an atmosphere that reflected both the couple's history and their future. "How does it feel waking up in our home?" Arthur asked on the first morning. "Like waking up from a very long dream," Eleanor replied, nestled in his arms. "A bad dream. A confusing dream. But now I've finally woken up to real life." Arthur kissed the top of her head, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in decades. "Eleanor, there's something I need to talk to you about." "What?" She turned to face him, slightly worried. "I want to marry you again." "Arthur, not now, not in a rush. But I want you to know that my intention is to make our union official again when you feel ready." Eleanor smiled, gently touching his face. "I don't need a piece of paper to know you love me, but when the right time comes, I'll accept your proposal." "How will I know when the right time is?" "You'll know." The following months were the happiest in Arthur's life since his youth. He and Eleanor developed a comfortable domestic routine with small rituals that strengthened their reconnection. Breakfast together in the garden, afternoon walks through the neighborhood, intimate dinners where they revisited memories and made plans. Eleanor gradually took up her interest in gardening again, turning the new house's backyard into a small paradise of flowers and aromatic plants. Arthur, in turn, significantly reduced his business activities, delegating more responsibilities to focus on his personal life. "Don't you miss the hustle and bustle of business?" Eleanor asked one night. "I miss the feeling of achievement sometimes, but nothing compares to the feeling of truly being home with the person I love. And what if you get tired of this quieter life?" "Impossible. I spent 23 years tired of the busy life. Now I want to savor the peace." In the 6th month of living together in the new house, Arthur realized that the moment had come to make the marriage proposal he had been planning since the first day. Eleanor seemed completely adapted to their life together, and the harmony between them was evident to anyone who knew them. He planned a simple but meaningful surprise. During one of their usual walks, he took Eleanor to the park, where they had had their first official date 28 years earlier. "Why did we come here today?" she asked, realizing it wasn't a coincidence. "Because this is where it all began between us." "Arthur, you're being dramatic." "Maybe a little," he smiled, kneeling before her in a gesture that completely surprised Eleanor. "Arthur, what are you doing?" "Eleanor, will you marry me?" "Get up from there. People are staring." "I'll only get up after you answer." Eleanor looked around, noticing that other people in the park were watching the scene with approving smiles. "You're impossible," she said, but reached out her hand to help him up. "Is that a yes?" "It's an I'll think about it," she replied, teasing him. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes you to kiss me." Arthur didn't need any more encouragement. He kissed Eleanor right there in the park where everything had begun, symbolically sealing the restart of their love story. "Now can I consider it a yes?" he asked when they parted. "Now you can." They got married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the new house, surrounded only by their closest friends and Martha Higgins's family, whom Arthur had officially adopted as his own. Gregory wasn't invited and had completely disappeared from their lives, honoring the agreement to leave Atlanta permanently. Occasionally, Arthur received vague news that his brother was living in São Paulo, but he showed no interest in re-establishing any kind of contact. Margaret sent a wedding gift accompanied by an elegant card. "I wish you all the happiness you deserve. Thank you for freeing me to find my own path to happiness." The message confirmed for Arthur that Margaret had moved on in a healthy way, without resentment over the end of their marriage. During the wedding ceremony, Martha Higgins was chosen as the maid of honor in recognition of the crucial role she had played in reuniting the couple. "Marty," Eleanor said during her speech, "without your courage in revealing the truth, Arthur and I would never have had a second chance. You are the true heroine of this story." The housekeeper cried emotionally, realizing that her decades of silent loyalty were finally being publicly recognized and celebrated. In the years following their second marriage, Arthur and Eleanor built a quiet and deeply satisfying life. They traveled to destinations they had planned to visit during their first marriage, regularly entertained friends in their cozy home, and developed new shared interests. Eleanor resumed her studies, completing a specialization in landscape design she had always wanted to pursue. Arthur became a semi-retired businessman, keeping only the activities that truly interested him. On their third wedding anniversary of their renewed marriage, Arthur found Eleanor working in the garden on a sunny afternoon. "What are you laughing about?" he asked, seeing her smile to herself while planting rose seedlings. "I was thinking about how surprising life is." "How so?" 6 years ago, I was a lonely seamstress living in fear, and you were a depressed businessman trapped in a passionless marriage. Now, we're a happy couple planning our retirement garden." "Do you regret anything?" Eleanor stopped working and looked at Arthur seriously. "I regret that we lost 23 years together, but I don't regret the people we became during those years apart." "Why?" "Because if we hadn't suffered, we wouldn't know how to appreciate what we have now." Arthur bent down to help her with the seedlings, reflecting on the wisdom of her words. "Do you think we would be as happy if we had never separated?" "Maybe not. Maybe we would have taken our union for granted and never truly appreciated its preciousness." "So you think Gregory unintentionally did us a favor?" Eleanor laughed at the irony of the situation. "Let's not go that far, but it's true that difficult experiences sometimes lead us to better places than we ever imagined possible." As they grew older together, Arthur and Eleanor became an example of mature and resilient love for everyone who knew them. Their story spread quietly through friends and neighbors, inspiring other people facing marital difficulties. On their 5th anniversary of their second marriage, they received an unexpected visit. Margaret showed up at the door, accompanied by a kind man she introduced as her fiancé. "I hope you don't mind the visit," Margaret said, "but we were in town, and I wanted to see the famous house where you rebuilt your happiness." "Make yourself at home," Eleanor replied warmly. "This house is always open to friends." During the lunch that followed, Margaret told them about how she had found true love with a widower who, like her, had been through a marriage where she wasn't fully loved. "It's funny how sometimes we need to go through imperfect relationships to recognize the right one when it comes along," Margaret commented. "And how are you feeling about the past?" Arthur asked. "Grateful. Grateful that you were honest about your feelings, grateful that Eleanor treated me with generosity, and grateful that I had the courage to start over." "And no hard feelings?" Eleanor wanted to know. "None. You two taught me that it's possible to end a relationship with dignity and without destroying the people involved." Margaret's visit brought a sense of complete closure to everyone involved in the story. It was the final confirmation that all the wounds had healed and that everyone had found their respective paths to happiness. When Arthur turned 60, he and Eleanor decided to formalize something they had casually discussed for years, the creation of a foundation to help women in vulnerable social situations. The inspiration came from Eleanor's own experience during her years of exile, when she had to rebuild her life from scratch with no financial or emotional support. "How many women are going through situations similar to what I went through?" Eleanor asked during a conversation about their philanthropic plans. "Probably thousands just in Atlanta," Arthur replied. "Then let's do something to help them." The Eleanor and Arthur Sterling Foundation was established with the goal of offering vocational training, psychological support, and microloans for women who needed to rebuild their lives after traumatic situations. The first project was a sewing and entrepreneurship course taught by Eleanor at a community school on the outskirts of town. The response was so positive that they quickly expanded into other areas of training. "Seeing these women regain their independence makes me feel that our suffering had a greater purpose," Eleanor said after a graduation ceremony for one of her classes. "What do you mean?" "If I hadn't gone through the experience of having to start over on my own, I would never fully understand the needs of these women." Arthur once again admired Eleanor's ability to turn painful experiences into a source of compassion and positive action. The foundation became one of the main activities of their lives, giving them a sense of purpose that perfectly complemented their personal happiness. On a December night, as they celebrated another wedding anniversary, Eleanor made an observation that perfectly summed up their joint journey. "Arthur, do you realize we've lived two completely different lives?" "What do you mean?" "The first life was based on innocence and the belief that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. The second life is based on wisdom and the certainty that love needs to be accompanied by maturity, honesty, and constant work." "Which one do you prefer?" "This one. Definitely this one, because now we know the real value of what we have." Arthur raised his glass of wine for a toast. "To our second life, then. To our second life, and to all the obstacles we overcame to get here." They toasted under the stars, in the garden Eleanor had created with such care, surrounded by the peace they had earned through decades of perseverance and true love. At 65, Arthur finally retired completely from business, transferring the company to younger partners. Eleanor, the same age, remained active at the foundation, but had significantly reduced her activities to enjoy more time with her husband. "You know what the best part of being retired is?" Arthur asked during a late breakfast. "What?" "Being able to wake up every day by your side without being in a hurry to go anywhere." "And the worst part?" "There is no worst part." Eleanor smiled, fully agreeing with the sentiment. "Arthur, can I make a confession?" "Always. During all those years alone, I used to imagine what our life would be like if we had grown old together from the start. And reality is much better than my imagination, because in my imagination, I didn't consider the value of the gratitude we feel today. Does gratitude make a difference? All the difference. Couples who never separated sometimes take their union for granted. We know exactly what it means to lose it and win it back." Arthur reflected on Eleanor's words, recognizing the deep truth they held. "So you think our forced separation in the end strengthened our relationship?" "I think it gave us a perspective that few couples have the opportunity to develop." At 70, Arthur and Eleanor were considered by the local community to be the example of a love that had withstood the test of time and the most adverse circumstances. Young couples often sought them out for marital advice, and they always generously shared the wisdom gained through their experiences. "What's the secret to a long and happy marriage?" asked a young wife who was going through difficulties. "Absolute honesty," Eleanor replied without hesitation, "and patience to get through the tough times." "And never giving up when the love is true," Arthur added, "even when it seems impossible to continue?" "Especially when it seems impossible. It was in the most difficult moments that we discovered our real strength as a couple." The young woman left the conversation visibly inspired and determined to fight for her own marriage, demonstrating the transformative power of Arthur and Eleanor's story. On a fall afternoon when they turned 75, they were sitting in the garden, watching the golden leaves fall from the trees Eleanor had planted years before. "Eleanor, do you have any regrets about the life we've lived together?" She thought carefully before answering, as she always did with important questions. "I have one single regret." "What?" "That we won't have enough time to love each other for all eternity." Arthur held her hand, feeling the familiar texture of fingers that had aged alongside his own. "Maybe we will. Maybe true love is eternal in a way we can't fully understand." "Do you believe that?" "I believe that what we built together is greater than our individual lives. Somehow it will continue to exist." Eleanor squeezed his hand, finding comfort in the idea that their love might transcend the limitations of physical time. As the years passed, Arthur and Eleanor faced the natural challenges of aging together. When Arthur developed heart problems at 78, Eleanor became his dedicated caregiver. When Eleanor underwent a delicate surgery at 76, Arthur never left her side at the hospital. Each health crisis was overcome through mutual support and the determination never to be separated again, regardless of the circumstances. "We promised we would grow old together," Arthur said during a medical appointment, "and we're going to keep that promise." "Together until the end," Eleanor agreed, squeezing his hand. The doctors were amazed at how the couple strengthened each other during the toughest moments. It was clear that their deep emotional connection had beneficial effects on their physical health. On their last wedding anniversary, at ages 82 and 78 respectively, Arthur and Eleanor held a symbolic ceremony, renewing their vows for the second time. "Why do you want to renew your vows again?" asked the community pastor. "Because every stage of life deserves to be celebrated," Eleanor replied. "We married young the first time, we married mature the second time. Now we want to marry as elders, with all the wisdom that age has brought." The ceremony was even simpler than the previous ones, held in their own home with only Martha Higgins as a witness, but it was filled with a profound emotion that moved everyone present. During their final vows, Arthur said, "Eleanor, you were my first choice when I was young, my second choice when we were mature, and now you are my eternal choice. I promise to love you not only in this life, but in any existence that may come after." Eleanor replied, "Arthur, our story proved that true love is stronger than any obstacle. If we had to wait 23 years to find each other again in this life, I will be willing to wait as long as necessary to find you in other lives." The exchange of vows was followed by an emotional silence, broken only by Martha Higgins's quiet weeping, as she had witnessed the couple's entire extraordinary journey. That night, Arthur and Eleanor lay down for the last time as a couple still looking forward to future anniversaries to celebrate. During sleep, Arthur had a peaceful dream where he and Eleanor walked hand in hand through an endless garden, eternally young and eternally in love. He woke the next morning to find that Eleanor had passed away during her sleep, a serene smile on her face, as if she had had the same dream. Arthur lived another 3 months after Eleanor's passing, long enough to organize his final affairs and ensure that the foundation they had created together would continue operating indefinitely. In his last days, he often talked to Eleanor's portrait on his nightstand, telling her about his day and sharing thoughts about the life they had built together. "You were right, my love," he said during his last conversation with the portrait. "The time we spent apart taught us to cherish every moment together. We didn't waste a single day after our reunion." Arthur passed away peacefully at home, found by Martha Higgins in the same position he used to sleep in when Eleanor was alive, with his arms stretched out over the side of the bed where she used to lie. Arthur's funeral was a celebration of the extraordinary life he and Eleanor had built together. Hundreds of people who had been touched by their love story came to pay their respects. Martha Higgins, now a sharp and active 90-year-old, spoke on behalf of the couple. "Arthur and Eleanor taught us that true love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice that has to be made every day, especially on the hardest days. They chose to love each other through 23 years of forced separation, and they kept choosing to love through all the years of reunion. This is a lesson we can all carry into our own lives." The Eleanor and Arthur Sterling Foundation continued operating under the supervision of Martha Higgins and a dedicated board, helping thousands of women rebuild their lives over the following years. The house where Arthur and Eleanor had spent their happiest years was transformed into the Foundation's headquarters, with the garden kept exactly as Eleanor had left it, serving as a living memorial of her ability to make beautiful things grow even in the most difficult circumstances. The end. Now tell us what you thought of this emotional story of Arthur and Eleanor. Do you believe that true love can overcome 23 years of separation? Leave your honest comment and share if you know any similar story in your own life or family. Don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.